Today we're talking about the Canon EF 50mm f1.8 and the Canon EF-M 22mm f2 and figuring out which one is better for the M50 and for you. First of all, these lenses are totally different. They are different focal lengths which will achieve you different looks. And so instead of trying to figure out which one is quote-unquote better, I'm going to show you what each of these lenses are good for and then leave it up to you to figure out which one fits your style better. When it comes to low light, these lenses are pretty similar. f1.8 to f2 is not a huge difference. However, you can get a speed booster for the 50mm which will make it an f1.2, whereas you cannot use a speed booster with native EF-M lenses. So if you're just using the lens, they're equal when it comes to low light, but if you get the speed booster for the 50mm, that'll give you a little over a stop more of light, which this is f2 and this is f1.2. It is a big difference. When it comes to price, the 22mm is about $230, the 50mm is $150. Now, I kind of consider this comparable because you're going to have to get the adapter with the 50mm, so it goes up to about $175, whereas if you get the speed booster, it's going to be $275. Depending on which adapter you get, the 22mm is pretty much smack dab between those two prices. For stuff like this, vlogging, sort of talking head segments, or even walking around vlogging, the 22mm is a great option. You get a shallow depth of field and you get a wide image, but what you don't get is the distortion that you would get with like a 10 or a 15mm lens. And for studios, I mean, I'm using it now. I love this lens for studio shots. But again, that depends on your style. If you are trying to do sort of like what I call this a friend lens and like talk to people like they're your friends, then the 22mm is an excellent lens for that. But if you're trying to do more of like a scholarly teaching type thing where you want people to view you as coming from a place of authority, then that's where something like the 50mm lens comes in really handy. Like I mentioned in other videos, the physical distance between your sensor and your subject is what causes the perspective or distance distortion. All that the lens does is zoom in or zoom out so that you can get your framing. Having a zoomed in lens like the 50mm, by the time you get farther enough back to get your framing, it doesn't have that same friend feeling. It has more of that feeling of authority, like looking down the table at a CEO or looking up on a stage at a public speaker. That's the feeling that you're going for with a lens like this. And that's why for like corporate interview shots, this lens is great because you're trying to evoke that feeling of this isn't something that you're like right up in the middle of, but something more that you're learning about this thing. If you look at this shot looks like a traditional interview shot and it looks really good. If you look at this shot from the same position but with the 22mm lens, you can tell two things. One, the distortion is identical. You don't have more distortion just because you have a wider lens, but then also you understand why the person felt a little bit more distance and separated from you. It's because the sensor was physically separated from you. Now, you don't always want to have tighter lenses for interview shots, because if you think about like event video journalism type shots, the 22mm lens is a better option for you. It allows you to get the microphone closer. You don't have to get like right up in someone's face, and it doesn't give that same distortion that you get with something like a 24mm equivalent. This allows you to get good compression while still getting close to your subject. Whereas, in order to get framing for that like journalistic interview type, you have to have the camera almost like 5 foot away from me, and the audio is just not going to be as good. Whereas if you're doing corporate videos, you probably want to get the 50mm. For like vlogging cutscenes, this is another thing where it just determines what type of shot you want to get. If you look at this shot of me flipping back over my trampoline, if I wanted to get that with a 50mm, it would have been way too tight. It would have felt claustrophobic. It would not have turned out good. But if you look at this shot where I was putting the fence back around it, then having something like the 50mm was great for like a close-up detail shot. Look at the difference between this close-up shot with the 22mm lens and the close-up shot with the 50mm lens. Now, I'm not going to say which one of these looks better because that's completely subjective, and I'm just showing it to you so that you figure out which one you like better. You get a different style of B-roll with a 50mm lens than you do with a 22mm lens. And finally, photos. And you probably already know what I'm going to say here, but it depends on the look that you're going for. So if your purpose is to get like portraits, 50mm is your guy. You want to have that compression that you get when zooming in on a subject. Whereas if you want to get wider portraits at basically the same distance, but say have the whole body instead of just them from the waist up, the 22mm is your guy. You don't want to pull back too far. Just like getting too close to a lens makes it distorted in one way, getting too far back makes it distorted in the other way. There is no right way to do it, but I hope this video has given you more information to determine what type of content you want to make and what type of gear will help you make that content. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and I'll see you all in the next video.